Do you ever wish that you felt in better control of your healthcare expenses? If you answered yes, you're not alone. A recent study by Allegis uncovered that over 70% of people find paying for healthcare to be the most frustrating part of the entire ecosystem. There are too many variables and so many questions to ask yourself. Like, did I choose the right health insurance coverage? Have I met my deductible yet? How much am I even paying for my health insurance? Should I contribute to an FSA? What about an HSA? To help answer those questions, I propose that you find a good way to organize your medical, dental, vision expenses, and find somebody that you trust to teach you the ins and outs. You guessed it, I want to be that guy for you. If you're interested, I created a tracker to help organize and present your healthcare information in a really clean, easy to understand way. Check out the description of this video for a link to that tracker. When you have it downloaded onto your computer, feel free to continue watching this video for an in-depth walkthrough of that tracker. And feel free to scroll over the timestamps at the bottom of this video to find the exact tab that you have questions about. Okay, I'm going to head over to my computer. Let's dive into the spreadsheet. All right, so you downloaded the tracker and you're ready to go. You'll notice 5 tabs in this tracker: Dashboard, Basics, Medical, Dental, and Vision. We're going to start in the Basics tab, and you'll see these little purple flags throughout the spreadsheet. Those purple flags mean that there's a comment or a note that I typed in to help you understand the cell a little bit better. But we're going to walk through everything right now. In this Basics tab, there are 3 sections: your healthcare basics for the year, your insurance premiums, and your tax rates. We'll start at the top, your healthcare basics, and this is a place for you to type in the basic information about your medical, dental, vision insurance plans, and if you have any pre-tax accounts like an HRA, FSA, or HSA, you can type that information in here as well. Some of this is pretty self-explanatory. For example, company name. So if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield, for example, you can type that name in here. Their phone number. A lot of these companies have many different phone numbers. So once you find the one that actually leads to a person, feel free to type that in this cell. And their website. Login credentials. Now, if you feel comfortable typing out your username and password on this spreadsheet, feel free to do so, and then make sure you securely store it so that nobody has access to it. The next row is the plan year start date. Now, if you have a calendar year plan, it'll be January 1st, 2023 for all of these, but some employers offer non-calendar year plans. So you'll want to make sure that you type in the correct first date. And it's important because insurance companies and HRA, FSA, HSA companies care about the first date of the plan year so that they know when you go see a doctor which plan year to assign each expense to. Similarly, there's the plan year end date. A lot of times it will be December 31st, 2023. But again, if you don't have a calendar year plan, you'll want to check that with your employer. Now, grace period end date. This is probably not applicable to your insurance plans, but it may be applicable to your HRA or FSA. Certain employers have the option of implementing a grace period, which means that you may have additional time to incur eligible expenses. Basically, a grace period extends the plan year end date by an amount of time dictated by your employer. If a grace period is implemented, they'll typically choose 2.5 months or 75 days. So you'll want to check that with your employer. Alternatively, your employer may elect a rollover amount. They cannot elect both a grace period and a rollover. They can only elect one or none. So you'll want to, again, double check that with your employer. If your employer elects to implement the rollover feature, that means that for the FSA, you can roll over up to $610 unused dollars to the next plan year. Now, the employer has the option of picking the rollover amount as long as it does not exceed $610 in 2023. So again, double check that with your employer. But this is a really great feature because if you didn't use all of your FSA funds, they could roll over to the next plan year to be used in 2024. This number also changes each year. The IRS increases it because it is an indexed number. So it is $610 for 2023, but next year it may be $640 or whatever the IRS decides. The next row is the runout date, or the last date to submit claims. This is very important because insurance companies and HRA, FSA, HSA administrators need to close their books at some point, and so does your employer. So they implement a runout date. It's typically 90 days or 3 months after the end of the plan year, and the runout date is the amount of time after the end of the plan year that you have to submit claims or requests for reimbursement. The runout date exists because, let's say, for example, you go to the hospital on December 31st of 2023. The service date is within the plan year, but you're probably not going to get the EOB, the explanation of benefits, from your insurance company until a month or 2, maybe even 3 months after. So this runout date gives you the opportunity to gather all of the paperwork and submit it to your administrators so that you don't lose out on your money. The next row is embedded versus aggregate deductible. This will be applicable for your insurance plans and sometimes your HRA. If you are the only person on your insurance plan, then you can completely disregard this row and you can just type in your individual deductible amount. Your individual deductible amount is the amount of expenses you have to pay for yourself before coinsurance kicks in or before your employer starts paying for expenses in your HRA. If you have more than one family member on your plan, you will then also have a family deductible amount. Let's say in this example, your individual deductible amount is $1,000 and your family deductible amount is $2,000. Let's then go back up to embedded versus aggregate deductible and talk about that. If you have an embedded deductible, it means that once the first person in your family incurs the individual deductible amount, then coinsurance kicks in for that family member. All other family members will then be grouped together to be responsible for the remaining deductible amount. So, in this example where the individual deductible is $1,000 and your family deductible is $2,000, let's say mom goes to the hospital and incurs a lot of expenses. Mom will only have to pay up to $1,000 of deductible expenses before coinsurance kicks in. Then husband and child will together have to incur the remaining $1,000 before coinsurance kicks in. Alternatively, you may have an aggregate deductible, which means that all family members' deductible expenses will be grouped together and need to hit the family deductible amount, in this example, $2,000, before coinsurance kicks in. So if mom goes to the hospital and incurs $1,500 of expenses, all of $1,500 would still be applied to the deductible, and together, mom, dad, and child will have to incur another $500 of deductible expenses before coinsurance kicks in. That's a confusing concept for many people, so feel free to ask your employer or your insurance broker if you have an aggregate or embedded deductible. And then this row 18, is your contribution maximum or your HRA benefit. This row will not be applicable to your insurance plans, so you can move on over to the HRA, FSA, HSA columns and type in the maximum amount that you may contribute or get from your employer. The HRA is decided upon completely by your employer, so get that number from them. The FSA, for 2023, the IRS imposed maximum is $3,050, but your employer can implement a lower maximum. So also make sure that you check that with your employer. The HSA has 4 different IRS imposed maximums. If you have individual insurance coverage, the maximum is $3,850. If you are 55 or older, you get an additional $1,000. They call those catch-up contributions. So if you have individual coverage and you're 55 or older, you can contribute $4,850. If you have more than one person on your insurance plan, it doesn't matter if it's 2, 3, 4, 10, your limit is $7,750 in 2023. And again, another $1,000 if you're 55 or older for a catch-up contribution. Then the last row is your actual election. So we just talked about the maximums, but you don't always need to contribute up to the maximum. You can contribute any amount from $1 to the IRS imposed maximum. So this will be the place that you can type in the amount that you elected to contribute for the calendar year 2023. So that's a summary of the top section. And as a reminder, feel free to type in as much or as little information as you'd like. This is to be helpful for you, so take it and run with it however you'd like. All right, let's move on to the insurance premiums section. This is where you can track how much you and your employer are paying for your medical, dental, and vision insurance. A lot of employers provide all 3 insurances as an employee benefit, but they might not pay for 100% of the premiums. A lot of employers share the cost with their employees. If that's the case, then this is where you can designate how much you pay versus how much your employer pays. I find that it's important to understand how much you're paying for your insurance plans, so that way when you get your pay stub each pay period, whether that be weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, or monthly, you know that your employer is taking the correct amount out of your paycheck. Also, people make mistakes, and your HR or your payroll team might be making mistakes on how much to take out of your paycheck pre-tax for your share of the insurance premiums. So it's good to know this number, so that way when you get your paychecks, you can make sure that your employer is taking out the correct amount. All right, and we can go to the third section of the Basics tab, which is the tax rates. This is a good section to fill out because no company is ever going to show you or tell you how much you're saving in taxes, but it's a good exercise so that you reward yourself for participating in pre-tax accounts like HRAs, FSAs, or HSAs. So feel free to click into this section and complete it with the information that you know. Your federal tax rate, these are the tax rates for 2023. It might be hard to predict which percentage or which bracket you are in, but do your best. This is for informational purposes only, so feel free to select the one that you think is applicable. Then choose the state of your residence. I filled it out so that whichever state you select, it will change the state income tax in the row right below it. So feel free to select the state that you live in. And then, while I think I got all of the rates right, if you know that your state income tax rate is a little different than the one that's pre-populated, feel free to override it with the correct percentage. Same thing with local income tax. That's hard to predict because there are many, many rates throughout the United States. So if you know that your percentage is different than what gets pre-populated, feel free to override that. All right, that's the Basics tab. Let's move on to the Medical tab. This is the tab that will have all of the details for your medical expenses that you incur in 2023. And we'll go through each column just to make sure you completely understand how to fill this out. The first column is family member, so you would type in the name of the family member that incurred the expense, the date of service, the provider, feel free to type in the specific doctor, the location, the hospital name, whatever triggers your memory. And then the fourth column is a brief description of the service or item. This is more for your sake to remember what the expense is about. Feel free to type in any keywords to distinguish between the different expenses. And then these 5 columns are where you're going to type in the amount that you paid. So patient responsibility is going to be the total amount that you had to pay to the provider. The other 4 columns are going to designate how much of the patient responsibility went towards copay, deductible, coinsurance, or other. As you may or may not know, copay is the flat dollar amount that you are responsible to pay at the time of your visit. Deductible is the amount of money you have to pay out of pocket before your insurance kicks in or before coinsurance kicks in. Coinsurance then is the amount that you are required to pay after your deductible is met. It's usually a small percentage, like 0, 5, 10, or 20% of the expenses. Other could be many things. If you scroll all the way down at the bottom of the chart, you'll see a note here. It could include out-of-network copays, deductibles, coinsurance, denied or not covered expenses, or expenses not submitted to your insurance plan. For example, if you go to a pharmacy like CVS, Walgreens, or Rite Aid and buy Band-Aids or over-the-counter medicines, those won't be coded as a copay, deductible, or coinsurance by your insurance company. So you would then include that in the other column. Basically, the other column is a catch-all for anything that your insurance doesn't process. Then this section is how you paid for it. The first column is how you actually paid the amount due to the provider. Feel free to use whatever words trigger your memory. For example, I have a Chase credit card, so a lot of times I write in my Chase credit card in this column. And then the next 3 columns are if you used your HRA, FSA, or HSA funds. So let's walk through this first example in row 5. Blake at Dr. Kind had an annual checkup and incurred $325 of expenses, 25 of which were copays, 300 were deductible. And you had to pay the provider and you used your HSA debit card. That means $300 of your HSA funds were used. Similarly, in the next one, Blake went to Dr. Kind for a follow-up, incurred $275 of expenses, 25 of which were copay and 250 were deductible expenses. But they didn't have the HSA card on them, so they instead used their Chase credit card to pay for the amount owed. But you still want to use your HSA funds to ultimately pay for this expense. So you would write $250 in this column, and then we move on to this column to really know the status of the claim. In this column, it shows the HRA, FSA, HSA status. I'm going to just refer to HRAs, FSAs, and HSAs as pre-tax accounts, just to make it simpler. But so this column tracks the pre-tax account status. If you click on the drop-down menu, you'll see 6 options to choose from. A, automatic. The company proactively paid my balance due on my behalf. This doesn't happen very often, but some HRAs are administered by your insurance company. If that's the case, then your insurance company will use HRA funds to reduce the amount owed, and you would select this option. B, card payment. If your pre-tax account administrator provides you with a debit card to use to pay for expenses, you can select this option, and you don't have to submit any claims because you've already used your HSA funds by using the debit card to pay for it. In the second example, for $275, they didn't have their HSA card on them, so they used the Chase credit card, but they'd still like their HSA funds to be used. In that scenario, they would then submit a claim to their administrator or log on to the online portal and pay themselves back. But in this scenario, let's pretend that you submitted a claim to your administrator. There's 3 things that could happen. Once you submit the claim, it would be pending. You filed the claim and you're waiting for reimbursement. Once your administrator reviews the documentation that you provided, they're either going to reimburse you or deny the claim. If they reimburse you, obviously you would select C2, that you were reimbursed, and no more action would be needed. If it was denied for any reason, you would select C3, and then in this section, you could put the notes. For example, you could say, the service date wasn't within the plan year, or not enough documentation was provided for the administrator to reimburse me. Whatever the reason, feel free to type that in the notes column. And the last option is D, successfully exhausted my annual funds. As you'll see in this example, let me reselect C2. But if you go down to the bottom, once you've used all of your HSA funds or pre-tax account funds for the year, feel free to select D, successfully exhausted my annual funds, so it shows that you don't need to submit a claim to your administrator. These statuses may not be intuitive right from the get-go, but as you use this tracker, you'll get more familiar with what these mean, and you should, or I hope, that you find these helpful. And then the last few columns are simple. They're just checkboxes. This is a way to track if you've received the invoice from the provider and the insurance explanation of benefits, EOB. As you probably know, you're going to get documents from the provider, but you're also going to get documents from your insurance plan. I like to wait until I get both before I pay anybody, because sometimes the provider will send you a bill for $1,000, for example, but your insurance company hasn't processed it yet. Once your insurance company processes it, you may only really owe $500. So I like to suggest that if possible, and if the provider isn't breathing down your neck to pay the bill, wait until you get both so that you know that you're paying the correct amount. Then you'll find these radio buttons helpful because it's a way to track if you've received one or the other or both. And then, like I said, column T is for notes. Feel free to use this for any notes that you'd like. Again, this spreadsheet is for you, so take it and run with it. The other two tabs, dental and vision, are set up exactly the same as the medical tab, but I find that it's helpful to separate them into 3 different tabs because typically you have 3 different insurance plans. All right, and that was a quick walkthrough of the medical, dental, and vision tabs. All right, and the last tab that we have to talk about, which is the more exciting one, is the dashboard. This is where all of your information is going to be presented in a nice, pretty way. As you can see, there are 7 different areas. This first one is the total out-of-pocket healthcare expenses that you've incurred year to date. You'll see the total amount is in the center, and then it distinguishes between premiums, other coinsurance, deductible, and copay around the circle. And then each one is broken down into more detail in other areas. This one is the premiums. You'll see your medical is the white line, dental is the light blue, and vision is the dark blue. And it's by month and the dollar amount. And up here is the total dollar amount. So a little over $2,000 in premiums were paid by me in this example. And then down here, right below it is my employer also paid this dollar amount in premiums on my behalf. It's a nice number to know so you can tell if your employer is being generous or not. And then medical expenses is broken down into this bar graph, other coinsurance, deductible, and copay. Ideally, you should see deductible expenses first and then coinsurance afterwards, since that's how it typically works. Vision expenses, dental is totaled here, $335 in this example. And then the last 2 sections are estimated tax savings and funds used year to date. This estimated tax savings takes the percentages that you entered in the basics tab, applies them towards your total healthcare expenses, and shows you how much in taxes you're saving by participating in these pre-tax accounts. As you may or may not know, if your premiums are processed pre-tax by your employer, you don't pay Social Security, Medicare, federal, state, or local taxes on those funds. Similarly, you also don't pay Social Security, Medicare, federal, state, and local taxes on HRA, FSA, or HSA funds. This is a really nice section of the dashboard because this is probably not going to be presented to you in any other way by any other company. It's nice to know that because you have control of your healthcare expenses and because you're participating in pre-tax accounts, you're saving your family money. $1,400 is a lot of money at the end of the day by basically doing nothing except participating in the accounts. So, as you can tell, I really like this section of the dashboard. Lastly, the funds used to date just summarizes how much of your HRA, FSA, or HSA funds you've used on healthcare expenses. This is particularly helpful for FSAs since FSAs are use it or lose it plans. So it's nice to know how much of your account you've used year to date so you can keep an eye on how much you have left for the year. And that's a walkthrough of the 5 tabs of the ultimate healthcare expenses tracker for 2023. Now that the walkthrough is done, you may still have questions, which is completely normal and to be expected. Insurance plans and pre-tax accounts like FSAs, HSAs, and HRAs are complicated, and you will inevitably have questions throughout this year and probably throughout your lifetime. Check out the other videos on my channel to potentially answer your questions, or you can comment on this video and I'll reply with what I know. My goal is to be a valuable resource for you throughout your life. I'm here to empower you and to help you save as much money as possible. I truly believe that everybody deserves financial stability and even financial freedom. And managing your healthcare expenses is one of the major ways to accomplish those goals. So, if all of that sounds good to you, let's stay in touch. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you on the next one.